Tammy. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for coming back. Today I am going to do another MCU recap on Thor, the first Thor. So, before we get started, let me do some housekeeping. So, make sure that you like my channel. Make sure that you comment, because I haven't been getting very many comments on my recap. So I want to know if you guys are enjoying them, if you think I should stop doing them, whatever. Let me know. Share my videos. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so it'll notify you whenever I upload a new video. So let's get started on Thor. So Thor, and I did take notes again, so you'll see me like kind of looking over at my notes. So Thor starts out, we see two women and a gentleman in a van, and they are what it looks like to be storm chasers. So they're looking for some kind of anomaly, something is supposed to be going on. And the one lady says, "Oh, Jane, I think you should check this out." They look, they see this Aurora, I think that's what it's called, and they start driving towards it. And then all of a sudden, when they get close, then the girl that's driving, she tries to veer off, and the other lady, Jane, is who we learn later is Jane Foster. She tries to steer her towards what looks like a tornado, and then they hit a man, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, please don't be dead. Do me a favor, please don't be dead." You know, when they get out and they find him. So that's kind of how it starts off. Then it goes to basically the story of the gods and keeping peace in the different realms, and it talks about Odin and fighting the frost giants. And sorry, maybe we'll do it like this. I didn't realize that sun was like so crazy. So they talk about the frost giants and Odin, and basically how they made an agreement that the frost giants weren't going to try to take over any more realms or anything like that. And basically Odin fought them, like there was a huge war, and that leads us to where we are today. And he's telling the story to these two little kids, so it's Thor and Loki. And he's telling them that one day one of them is going to be the king, and they may have to make that decision. Hopefully they don't. And, you know, Thor's like all excited, like, "Oh, I'll slay them like you once did, father." And he's like, a wise king does not wish for conflict, and hopefully you'll never have to, you know, deal with it or whatever. So then they grow up. They show Thor in his full Thor garb with the helmet with the wings and everything. And as we call it, Meow Meow, because of the girl in the movie. But it's Milner. And, you know, he's holding it up and everything. People are cheering. So this is the day that he's going to be announced as king. So he takes his helmet off. He, you know, puts the hammer down. He kneels before Odin, which is his father. And basically he's taking his oath. And suddenly Odin kind of looks off to the side and he says, "Frost giants." And you see underneath where they keep all of the relics and all of their weapons, there's frost giants. They've infiltrated Asgard, and they're trying to get the casket, I think they call it. And And so they kill the Asgard guards, the Asgardian guards, and um, so Odin snaps his scepter onto the ground, and this big machine comes out of the wall, and he has fire in his face, and he just lights them on fire and kills them all. And then they go down there, and Thor is telling him, he wants to know why and how they got in, why they attacked, and all of this other stuff. And Odin is like, it was a foolish thing for a few of them. It's not reflective of all of the frost giants. So, Thor is pissed off because his dad won't let him go. And Loki's talking to him and telling him, "Oh yeah, I think you're right. We should find out why they did it and how they got in, blah blah blah. But you'd be defying Dad." So then we meet Lady Sif and the Warriors 3. So they come in, and Thor basically convinces them to go with him and Loki to talk to the king of the, I think is Alfie, I think his name is, the king of the frost giants, and find out how they got in and why they attacked. So they agree. They go to Heimdall, who is the guardian of the bridge and of Asgard. So he sees everything, and he's pissed off because they got in, and he didn't see them. So he tells them, they're free to go there. He will send them there on the Bifrost. But if it seems like they're bringing back danger, he's going to close the Bifrost off, and they'll just die there. So they go to the Frost Giants world. Jotunheim, I think is the name of it. And they talk to the Frost Giants king, and he basically tells them to back the F up. You have a traitor amongst you all, and that's how we got in. That's how we knew, how to get in. And you need to leave while I still allow it. And he's like, okay, fine. And one of the frost giants says, yes, run home, little boy, or little princess. And everyone's like, oh God, oh no. So Thor stops, he turns around, knocks him out, and then he says, next. And then there's this huge fight that breaks out with the Frost Giants, Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, and Loki. So one of the Warriors 3 gets grabbed by one of the Frost Giants, and it burns his arm. So he says, don't let them touch you, don't let them grab you. And then one of them grabs Loki, but the same thing doesn't happen to Loki. His arm actually starts turning blue. And then he kills the Frost Giant or whatever. One of the other Warriors 3 actually gets basically an icicle stabbed through his chest or his shoulder. So they're like, Thor, we have to go. And he's like, well, go. I'm still fighting. So they grab the guy off of the icicle. They carry him off. And they're running, and the Frost Giant King, unleashes this charging bull rhino looking ugly thing, and it goes after, Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 and Loki, and, so they get to the very end as they're running. They get to the end, and they're basically like, Heimdall, open the Bifrost, and nothing's happening. And then the thing comes up from underneath, And Thor sees it, and he takes his hammer, you know, he starts spinning it, and goes up into the sky, and then he flies right through the thing's mouth. And then he, you know, he turns around, he has a smirk on his face, and then he realizes there's like a gazillion, yes, a gazillion, frost giants behind them. And then all of a sudden, the Bifrost, they think the Bifrost is opening up to pull them through, and it's the old father. And Alfie comes up, and he's like, "Oh, you're looking weary," and you know, and he's like, "Just let them leave." And like Thor's like, "Yes, we can finish them off together, father." And he tells him to hush, and the old father, Odin, tells them, you know, the frost giants, like, let them go, let us all go, you know, don't start a war. And the frost giant king is like, no, your son asked for this. And he says, well, it's an act of a boy, because he says, your boy came for this. And he says, well, it's an act of a boy. And he says, it doesn't matter, basically we'll be fighting a war. So they try to do something, he knocks them over, and then they open up the Bifrost, and it pulls them all up. So Odin tells them to take the one guy that got stabbed by the icicle to the doctor, basically. And he's yelling at Loki and Thor, and he gets so angry because Thor basically calls him old and stupid, and he's allowing, you know, the frost giants to do whatever they want, and the 9 realms laugh at them, and blah blah blah, and they're gods, blah, blah, blah. So he takes his power, he takes his hammer, and then he banishes him to Earth. But then he whispers something to the hammer, and he says, you know, basically whoever finds the hammer, if they're worthy, then may they hold the hammer and have the full strength of Thor. And then he sends the hammer into the Bifrost as well. So basically it goes back to when Jane Foster and Darcy and Eric Selvig run into Thor, and then he's kind of walking around, and Jane notices that there's like, you know, those like crop circles that everybody used to be crazy about back in the day. So it looks like that in the dirt. So she's like, oh my gosh, we got to take pictures, and we got to analyze this, you know, before it disappears. And he's walking around, and he's yelling, hammer, hammer, and he's like, Father Heimdall, open the Bifrost, and he's like yelling all this stuff, and Darcy gets freaked out, and she tases him. They put him in the truck, take him back. They give him clothes, and then they take him to eat, which is probably one of my favorite scenes out of the movie, is when he's eating, and Darcy's like, you ate, you know, a couple boxes of Pop-Tarts. How are you still this hungry? And he drinks the last bit of his coffee, and he says, this drink is delicious. And he throws the mug on the ground and says, I'll have another. So, like he's saying, there's some guys that come into the place, and they're saying that, you know, they all tried to pick up this satellite. The satellite's really heavy. It's stuck in the ground. And then Thor asked them, where is it? And they said, you know, about 50 or 19 miles west of here. So Thor just starts walking out. So Darcy, Jane Foster, and Eric go running after him. And they're like, where are you going? And he's like, it's not what they think it is. It's not a satellite. And I can get it. So he basically tells Jane if she takes him there, he'll get it, and he'll answer all of her questions, and it'll answer a lot of her questions. And So she's like all excited, and then Eric's like, "Let me talk to you on the side." He seems a little bonkers. He's talking about Thor and Bifrost, and this is stuff from stories when I was a kid. I don't think he's 100% there. Don't take him. So she goes back to him. She apologizes. She says she can't take him. He says they say farewell to each other, and then he starts walking, and then so I think that was the point where, sorry, um, and they have it all like the government has like this whole thing built around. Well, Shield has this whole thing built around the hammer, but oh, excuse me. So, um, they as they're going back to Jane Foster, Eric, and Darcy, they're going back to the place. They see like her stuff like on the truck. And she's like, "Hey, that's my stuff." And they go back to where she's been doing her research, and Shield is there. They're taking all of her stuff. They take her notes and her book, and they take all the computers and everything. And they're sitting kind of on the roof or whatever. And she's like, you know, really bummed out because she feels like she has to start all over, and it's like years of work. And so, I think Eric says that he knows about the Shield people, and you know it's funny because he mentions I know a scientist, and he worked with radioactive whatever. So I think he's talking about Bruce Banner, and he says, you know, Shield came in and like he's never been heard from again. So he's like, I'll try to email some people that I know and see what I can find out. So they have to go to the library. He goes to the library. He finds like all these books and stuff about, well, he finds a book that has to do with like old folklore, and it has Thor in there and Milner and all of that stuff. And, or as we like to call it, Meow Meow. And it has all that stuff, and he takes it to Jane, and he's basically like explaining to her like this is why this guy is crazy. But Jane sees him in, well, actually no, he doesn't take it to her then. She actually sees Thor going into a pet shop, and he asks for a horse. He says, "I need a horse." And the guy's like, "We only have dogs, cats, and birds." And he's like, "I need one big enough to ride." And Jane asks him if he still needs a ride. He says yes. And they go riding to his hammer, and or what they think is a satellite. So she's like, "This is like so weird. Have you ever done this before?" He's like, "Oh yeah, many, times I've done these journeys, blah, 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 blah." So she takes him to it, and she's like, they built a city around this, so it's not a satellite. They would have cleaned up the wreckage and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, it's not a satellite. And he hands her his coat, and he's like, "You'll need this." And she's like, "Why?" And he kind of smirks, and then it starts thundering and raining and all this stuff, and he plans on breaking in and getting Milner. So he goes through this whole fight, and he breaks in. He's like beating up these guys, and Coulson says, "I need somebody to get eyes on him with a gun up high." So all you see are hands, and you see them go to reach for a gun, and then they change their mind and they grab a bow and arrow. So you see this guy, he's like jumping on this crate and doing all this stuff, and then he's up high, and then you realize that it's Hawkeye, which is pretty cool because I didn't even realize that until I watched it again, and I was like, oh yeah, they have like these little Easter eggs in all the movies. But so Hawkeye's asking him, "Do you want me to shoot him?" He's like beating up the guys. Are you sending more guys out here to get beat up? Like, what's going on? And Coulson's like, "No, I want to see this," because he finally gets to the hammer, and Coulson thinks that he's going to pull the hammer out. So, and so does Thor. Well, doesn't quite work that way because he still has not learned from what his father has tried to teach him. So then they arrest them, and Coulson's asking them questions and stuff. And Jane Foster, she calls Eric and she said, I did exactly what you told me not to do. You told me not to trust him, not to go with him, and I'm here. So if you don't hear from me, then you know what happened. And I guess she finally goes back or whatever. So they arrest him. And so Coulson's asking him questions and stuff. And then Coulson gets a call. He tells him he'll be back. And like Thor's not answering anything. He looks so defeated because he couldn't pull Milner out of the ground. And then when Coulson closes the door, we see Loki. And, Thor's like, oh my gosh, Loki, like, what are you doing here? And what's going on? What happened? And he says, father's dead. And Thor, starts crying, and he's like, and Loki's basically blaming it on him. The banishment and all this other stuff. And he's like, well, I want to come home. Obviously, anyone who loses a parent is going to want to see them. And he's like, no, mother forbids it. I now have the burden of the, of the throne. Now I'm the king, and mother forbids you to come back, and basically saying goodbye. So Thor apologizes and says goodbye. And then Coulson comes back in, and they show Loki. I guess no one sees him, but he's trying to pull the hammer out of the ground. He can't pull it out. So, obviously, he's not worthy. So then so someone radios for Coulson. They say he has a visitor. Thor has a visitor. And it's Eric Selvig. Now, this is after he has finally shown Jane Foster the book, and showed her basically like all this folklore and these stories he was told as a child. And she's like, well, you're the one that told me to take everything, and research it and blah blah blah. And like they kind of get into a small argument. So he goes and he lies and says that his name is Donald something. He's a scientist. He was upset because they took all of Jane Foster and his work, and that's why he came in, and he's on steroids and all this other stuff. So, and Coulson sees on the screen that he's lying. This guy is not Donald. It's a falsified ID. But Coulson, says, okay, he can go. And as they're walking out, Thor actually sees Jane Foster's book on the side, so he grabs that and he puts it in his coat. And Coulson stops him, and he tells him, keep Donald away from the bars. And he's like, okay. So then Thor's like, where are we going? And he's like, we're going to get a drink. So they go to a bar, and Thor's kind of pouring out his heart, like, I had it all wrong, and I didn't see what Dad was trying to teach me, and blah blah blah, and all this other stuff. And basically Eric tells him, stay away from Jane. I see the way she looks at you. Stay away from her, and you need to leave tomorrow, and I'll buy you another drink. So he orders 2 Boilermakers. They drink them. And then all of a sudden, you see Jane Foster sitting in like what looks like a trailer, and there's a knock on the door, and it's Thor, and he has Eric thrown over his shoulder. And she's like, oh my God, what happened to him? He's like, we drank, we fought, he made his ancestors proud. He like throws him on the bed, and he's like, I really think, Eric says this to Thor, I really can't believe you think that you're the god of thunder, but you really do. And he like slaps him a little bit, and then he falls asleep. And then Jane is all frantic, and she asks if they can step out to talk. And so he tells her that she can't stop her research because she's right, and there's other worlds and other realms and all this other stuff. And then he gives her book back of notes. And then he starts explaining to her like the 9 realms. and he's showing it to her by what she has, and he's like, yeah, you can see it, it's right under your nose, you can see it with the Hubble telescope. And she's like, Hubble. So he's explaining all this stuff, and then they kind of fall asleep outside, which is kind of cute. And then the next day, a very hungover Eric is kind of sitting there, and Jane and Thor have made breakfast for Darcy and Eric. So they give them, the breakfast and everything, and meanwhile, you see Lady Sif and the Warriors 3. They have already gone to speak to the king, and they found out that it was Loki. And he says, father has fallen into the Odin sleep and blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, can you call Thor back? And, we're going into war and all this other stuff. And he's like, no. So when Thor and Jane and all of them are, making breakfast and doing all this stuff, you see Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, they're really pissed off, and they're like, what we have to do. And a guard comes and knocks on the door and says, Heimdall requests your presence. And they're like, oh God, we're in trouble, because they were talking about it, and they were saying, what if Heimdall can see us? So, and he's like, you wish to defy our king and bring Thor back, and, it's treason. And they're like, and Lady Sif is like, yes. And he's like, good. So he's like walking away, and they're like, so you'll open up the Bifrost and you'll let us through? And he's like, no, I cannot open the Bifrost and, and go against my king. And he just keeps walking. And they're like, well, what do we do now? And then she turns around, and his sword is already in the little key thing to open up the Bifrost. So they land in, where are they? New Mexico, I think. And they find where they are. And it's funny because there's like, they're being followed by S.H.I.E.L.D. Thor's being followed by S.H.I.E.L.D. And they're like, is the circus in town or something going on? And they're like, I don't know, call it in. And he's like, yeah, we got Xena, Warrior Princess, Jackie Chan, and I can't remember what they call the other guy. So they wind up there, and they're telling Thor, Thor's like, I can't come back, because they're like, you have to come back with us. And he's like, I can't come back. My father's dead, and my mother forbade it. And they're like, your father's not dead. And he's like, huh. So, they're all talking and stuff, and they're like, is somebody else coming? Because it starts like storming and all this other craziness is going on. So when they landed, obviously the Bifrost left a mark in the ground. So S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Coulson and some other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents went to investigate. And then there's like storming above them, and all of a sudden there's this metal thing that appears. And they're like, the one agent is like, is it one of Stark's? And Coulson's like, I don't know. That guy never tells me anything. And he, he gets on this bullhorn, and he's like basically telling them he's using, a weapon that's not registered, and blah, blah, blah. And then the face opens up, and the flames like kind of set their cars on fire and stuff. And then it turns around and starts walking towards town. They realize what it is that's coming. So they're trying to get the people out of town, and, and the Warriors 3 and Sif are like, yes, Thor gets to fight with us. And he's like, I'm just the man here. Like, I don't have any powers, but I can help get the people out. So they're trying to get all the people out. Lady Sif stabs the destroyer, is what it's called, in the neck, and it doesn't do anything to it. And they're fighting, and finally, he's telling Jane Foster and everybody, he's like, you gotta go. Lady Sif, you've done all you could do. Go. go back, because someone has to stop Loki. And he starts walking towards the destroyer, and everybody stops because they're like, what is he doing? And he starts talking. He's like, brother, I don't know what I've done to upset you like this, but these people have nothing to do with this. So killing them will do nothing for you. Kill me instead. So the destroyer closes up its face, and he kind of smiles a little bit like, okay, Loki, he sees what I'm saying. He's not going to kill me. And the destroyer kind of turns around, but he does the most wicked backhand, and he knocks Thor into oblivion, what seems like, but he knocks him back, all the way back to where Jane Foster and everybody is. She takes out running towards him, and he's like, it's over, you guys are safe. And she's like, it's not over, it's not over, don't say that, don't say that. And he dies. And the destroyer turns around, he starts walking away. He's going back to where the Bifrost kind of dropped him off. And Jane Foster's crying. And then they flash to Odin. And Odin has a tear come down his eye, while he's basically on his deathbed. And then all of a sudden you start hearing his words that he said to the hammer. And then the hammer just pops out of the shield thing, and they're like, what is going on? And it starts flying across, and then Eric sees it coming straight for where Jane is, and he's like, oh my god. He runs, he grabs her, he moves her, and all of a sudden it hits his hand, and he's standing up, and there's this, like, all this thunder, lightning, all this craziness going on. The destroyer turns back around. He knocks the flames away. Then he flies up into the air. He's swinging his hammer. And he's basically making a tornado. He sucks the destroyer up. They kind of battle it out within the tornado. He puts his hammer, Milner, basically into the destroyer's head. The destroyer lands. He lands. He starts walking towards them. And Lady Sif and everybody is like so pumped, because he's like in full Thor garb and everything. And she's like, is this how you normally look? And he's like, more or less. And she's like, it's a good look, And he's like, do you want to, see this bridge that we're talking about? And she said, yeah. So basically they all go to where Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 basically came from, the Bifrost, and they're calling Heimdall because Loki he saw that Heimdall basically let them leave, so he let the frost giants in. So Heimdall, he froze, Loki actually did with the casket. He froze Heimdall, so Heimdall is frozen, and there's 2 frost giants next to him. And they're calling Heimdall. He's not answering. Why isn't he answering? Can he not see us? Why won't he open the Bifrost? And all of this other stuff. And Heimdall finally breaks through. He stabs the 2 frost giants. He puts his sword in the little key thing. He sucks them back up. They get there. He's like laid out because of what they did. He fought Loki basically, and then Loki froze him. So he tells him to take him, to the doctors, and he's gonna take care of Loki. So he gets there, and I think this was after. Yeah. So the frost giants had come there, and the frost giants had came into where Odin was sleeping. Now this was before Thor and the warriors got back, but they came into where Odin was sleeping, and the frost giant Alfie was going to kill Odin, but Loki wound up killing him. So the mother was like super pumped. She's like, oh my gosh, Loki, you saved him. And And basically it was a ruse. And so Thor comes in and she's like, "Oh my gosh, Thor, and he's like, "Why didn't you, tell her the truth and how, you you told me father was dead and how I was banished and she didn't want me back and all this other stuff." And she's like looking super confused. And he's like, "Well, I'm going to kill the frost giants. So because they came in here." And he was like, "So I have Odenheim to destroy." So he blows Thor out of the wall. And then he goes to um, where the Bifrost opens up. And he opens up the Bifrost, but he does like something with the casket, and it's basically destroying Odenheim. So all the frost giants and everything are dying off. And Thor goes to him and he basically begs him. And he's like, "You can't kill a whole race." And he's like, "Why are you being so lovey-dovey now? And please don't tell me it's that woman." So that's like they have a whole battle. At first Thor didn't want to fight him. And finally, he kind of tricked him because he knocked him almost off of the Rainbow Bridge. And Thor went to get his hand, and Loki basically stabbed him with his staff. And then a whole bunch of Lokis popped up, and he, did the hammer thing, the thunder or the lightning, and all of the Lokis disappeared except for the real one. He put his hammer on him. The Bifrost was jacked up at that point because Loki was trying to destroy the different realms and destroy the Bifrost so that they could be the only ones that could travel, the Asgardians. And so Thor's trying to figure out how to stop it. And Loki's like, "With all that power and you still can't do anything." So Thor reached his arm out, his hammer came to him, and he starts beating the Rainbow Bridge. And Loki's like, "What are you doing? You're going to tear up the Bifrost." And so Loki tries to charge at him. The last hit basically blew them into the sky. The Bifrost thing falls into the water, and they start falling. And all of a sudden, Odin appears and he grabs Thor's foot. And Thor has Loki's staff. And Loki's holding on to the end of the staff. And Loki, professes to him, "I could have done it, Father. I could have done all of this for you." And Odin looks at him and he says, "No, Loki." And Loki realizes that he really actually isn't the family. And he lets go. And he gets sucked up into the mess that he's made. So then it goes to, like, there's a feast, and, Thor and everybody's there, and Lady Sif apologizes. Well, she gives her condolences to Thor and Loki's mom. And she's like, "Is he going to be okay?" He's like, "Well, he mourns the death of his brother and he misses the girl." So he goes to Heimdall and asks if he can see her, and he says yes. And she looks for you every time, like, there's a storm or whatever. So, which is really cute. One part that I missed somewhere in there, um, after they fought the battle with the frost giants, and Odin had banished Thor. Loki went down to touch the casket to see what would happen, and he basically turned blue, and Odin came down after him, and he was like, "Am I cursed?" And he's like, "No." So Loki basically demanded that he tell him what happened, and basically Odin stole him. He was a baby. He stole him from the frost giants, hoping that because once Loki got old enough to understand what he was, because he was actually one of them, then maybe he would bridge the gap between Asgard and Odenheim, and they could find peace. So that's when Odin basically went ill, because Loki was yelling at him and he just kind of fell on the ground, and then the guards took him away. But anyway, so fast forward back to the end of the movie. So that was the end, and then this was one of the famous Marvel after credit scenes. So the after credit scene is basically Nick Fury's talking to Eric Selvig, and he shows him this blue box, and he tells him, you know, it's unlimited energy, and he needs his help to figure out, you know, now I'm looking. He needs his help to figure out how to harness it, and there's like a mirror thing, and you can see Loki in the mirror, and he's behind Eric, and he whispers. He looks at it and he whispers, "Well, I guess that's worth a look." And then Eric says it to Nick Fury, but you don't see Loki behind him. So then you realize that Loki is actually he's the god of mischief. So he is actually I don't know if he's not posing as Eric Selvig, but he basically has possessed them in a way that he can speak through him. So that introduces us to one of the stones. So that is the recap for Thor. That was a long one. Sheesh Louise. That was the recap for Thor. Stay tuned, because my next recap is going to be another one shot. I think it's called The Consultant. So I think it's going to probably have something to do with Eric Selvig. So we'll see more about that, but that's going to be my next recap. Hopefully that'll be in the next couple days. I was going to try to do it tonight, but I don't know if any of you know, but I actually work a full-time job, and I have to be at work at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and it's pretty late right now, and I still have to post this video. So, not going to happen tonight, but so stay tuned. I'm going to continue to do my recaps unless you guys, you know, tell me you hate them, you don't want to see them anymore, you just want to see design stuff, then I'll stop doing them. But until then, the next one will be a Marvel one-shot, and then I think it's Avengers 1, the first one. So we shall continue on. So until next time, you guys, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. And I will see you guys next time.